couple things that caught my eye this week. One that was recent, and I can't remember her name. I think it's Siwa. She's a Nickelodeon star these days, and there's some of us here who remember the days when Nickelodeon was introduced to our families. It was kind of not for us, but it was for our kids, maybe the modern day version of Disney Presents. You guys remember when Sunday night used to be Disney, and you'd see the frog, and you would know that family-friendly content was going to be presented between the hours of about 6 and 8 o'clock on Sunday night. So the family kind of settled in to be able to watch, maybe Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, maybe be able to watch The Wizard of Oz together, and it was an epic event. And so when Nickelodeon came out, when cable became, and even satellite became more prominent, we welcomed kind of Nickelodeon because it seemed to harken back to those innocent, naive, family-friendly outings. Now, obviously, we know that that's changed because the content on Nickelodeon has radically changed. It's certainly not really very family-friendly anymore, but probably one of the biggest rug-pulling instances was the Miley Cyrus 180 Degrees. You guys remember that? Is that lots of Christian moms, especially, and their young daughters had put a whole lot of stock in Hannah Montana. And when Hannah Banana decided to become a banana, there were a lot of Christian moms who just went absolutely nuts because they felt like Hannah Banana, who became a banana, had betrayed them, etc. But in many ways, a lot of that was because they put their trust in a TV character. They put their trust on a TV channel. And kind of the latest one of that right now is, I think, this Siwa Joba, I think if that's her name, something like that, who's a 17-year-old who's had the audiences of young kids who are put in front of Nickelodeon to babysit, because that's kind of what we do with TV with young kids these days, has now decided that she's going to be the latest entry, high-profile entry into the LGBTQXR PLX camp. And her influence is not for folks that are simply her age at 17. Her influence is grade school kids. So I want to throw that out there for you to think for just a moment about that. And then the second item I want you to think about is a posting that I think I put in the Sunday school line earlier this week. And this directly relates to kind of this remez idea that we're talking about, and the question that we're really trying to finish up with today, which is, what prevents me from becoming an expert about my faith and believership? And this has to do with, surprisingly, a decent short article about all of the Christian leaders who had prophesied that Donald Trump was going to be president. And it was and here's what I mean by prophesied. It's one thing to make a prediction that you say, well, I'm predicting that Joe Biden is going to win. It's another thing to tell believers or to tell anybody, I have a message from God that says this is what is so. And I say that to you because the consequence of those leaders being incorrect is either minimal to none. So their church congregations remain unchanged in the face of their direct from God prophecy being incorrect. So I want to leave those two things out on the welcome mat for you today as we start, and then as we finish up our remez and what prevents you from being an expert about your believership and your faith. So, so your thoughts, some conversation elements.
My question would be, why do these people in the church not try to hold their feet to the fire and say, wait a minute, you told us that God said this was going to happen and it didn't happen. What's up with that? Is God lying? Are you lying? What's the...
You muted yourself, Gene. I didn't hear the rest of your thing.
I was trying to use the temporary spacebar mechanism. Can you hear me now? Okay. Why don't these people in this church, a church that said, where the leader says, God said, I mean, when he says God said that this is going to happen, that is a prophecy. That is different from a quote unquote prediction. I'm not sure I could split the difference with you on that, Preston. But it's like if he gives a quote word from God and it doesn't happen, somebody's wrong, and that leader is not being held accountable. And that's what I'm asking is why don't the people in these congregations say, wait a minute, there's something not right here? And I don't know, are they just blindly following? Are they just like the guy or gal or whoever it might be? What is the deal with that?
Well, that's part of my question out to you all is why does this happen? Why are these folks allowed to be able to and Gene, when I in modern day parlance, I don't know that a prediction or a prophecy might be very distinctive, but within our church environment, the distinction is this is, and when I say prediction, it's coming just from me. I predict it's going to rain today. But the prophecy from within a God honoring sense is when I say, God told me it's going to rain today. And so if we put those on the scale, one of those has the empirical nature that says, God told me and I'm telling you. The other one just says, I predict I'm going to win the lottery. And if that doesn't happen, no one's going to come and stone me because I'm just an idiot. But if I tell people that God told me I'm going to win the lottery and I don't, there should be some accountability with you're our prophet. You tell us what says the Lord, what we need to hear from the Lord, and what you just told us is untrue.
I think so many people are afraid to approach someone of, for lack of a better word, power, to let them know that, hey, you didn't measure up. What you said didn't happen. And, why didn't happen? Because if it was from God, it should have happened if he's the one who told you it was going to happen. But I think there's still this level of, I don't know, the subservience that we think that everyone who is a leader knows best. And I think there is a lot of that blind following for some people. And I think that's what you're trying to help us learn to flesh out, what is right and how to go about discerning for ourselves to make sure that the people that are over us are giving us truth. And so I think it's very difficult for someone who's been used to following to actually stand up and say, wait a minute, so that's just kind of my thoughts.
To expand a little bit on you, Sherry, I kind of agree with you, because if we start questioning people that are supposedly no better than us, right, then that now puts the onus of responsibility on us to understand why and to then do the right thing. And people nowadays don't want that responsibility. They just want somebody to tell them what to do, and they want to be sheeple and just blindly follow them along. So I kind of agree with Sherry on that, because I think that if we start questioning Matt or Gene or you or anybody who we think knows more than us, then that now means we need to go figure out why we think that, which means we now have to go into this lovely book over here, which people don't necessarily want to do.
I think that there's another aspect to that. As I've been listening, I've been thinking, and I think that there's something going on in our society today where the role of God is being reduced more and more and more and more. his elevation is coming down, and so now the prophecy is coming down to the same level as the meteorologist's prediction.
Correct.
Oh,
Correct.
They're able to keep their job and still get it wrong. So it's like, it's kind of the same thing. It's like, okay, well, he or she missed it that time, and all is good. We just keep on going, and there isn't the reality that if it's God saying something, God will be certain to make whatever He says happen, and we're not holding people to that. We certainly don't enact the biblical regulation with regard to a false prophet, because we have other laws in our country now that kind of prohibit that. So, but that doesn't seem to stop the Shira law from the Muslims. They're able to, evidently without impunity, to go ahead and still violate our American laws in order to keep their Shira laws. I'm not sure where the line is. I don't understand why one group, I guess because of fear, that's one thing that comes up, they're able to do what they want to do because people fear them, and we're not feared because we don't do anything because we're not a threat. I think there's a day coming, and I'll call this a prediction, if I can make this distinction, but I think there's a day coming when God's going to manifest Himself in such a way that we will be feared because we're His people, and people will understand who He is. But I don't know how far down the line that is, but that's my thought on it. It's like, okay, the prophecy didn't come true. The weather didn't turn out the way the guy said. Same thing as far as a lot of people are concerned.
What it does do is it hurts the cause of Christ. The unbelievers out there, they're just looking for a reason to laugh at us and say, see, I told you there's no God. And this just adds fuel to their fire.
So, Jerry, I think that there's a lot that's in what your last statement is, that the world outside of faith institutions, outside of worship groups, really doesn't care so much about the spirit of what it is that is being taught or being bandied about or being presented. But they're going to track when we get it wrong. And that's why Hillsong is so in the news right now. That's why the immorality charges of Hillsong are so in the news right now, because they don't care all of the good that Hillsong has done for the cause of Christ over the several years they've been an institution. They want to take a look at this anomaly that's occurred because people have hurt feelings, or because in a cancel culture time, we understand, for instance, that when you give your money to a worship institution, if it's abused, that's not you abusing it. The Lord's got to respond to what that misuse is. Additionally, when you provide service in a worship environment, that volunteer service, unless you really feel like you're being taken advantage of, that's what we do with each other, is we serve one another. And so if you're reading some of the articles, that's really getting flipped topsy-turvy, where it's people are abusing babysitters, people are abusing these workers who were working inordinate hours for free. And so there are folks who are chomping at the bit to report when faith institutions, when worship gangs get it wrong. And so Jerry's absolutely right about that. And I think Sherry, Sarah, Gene, you guys are right too when we're talking about the prediction is kind of what a prophecy is these days. And I love when Gene, and he said this before, the fact that meteorologists keep their jobs is a little bit amazing, except I think that they keep their jobs more because now their titles change. So it's changed. Remember, they were what kind of weather reporters at one time. Now they're kind of meteorologists. So when you add the more scientific bent to it, well, you're predicting according to the science. And so you don't lose your job because you predicted sun 4 days in a row and we've actually had a typhoon. So just changing the packaging and then kind of changing the expectation has allowed those folks to keep their jobs. But additionally, look, we've got instances in the Bible, especially the New Testament, where the idea is trust but verify. Listen to me coming into your town, presenting you information. But when Steve's posting something on our Slack lines, doggone it, read it, and then go and do your own research to find out if it's got legs or if it's just something that doesn't work with that. When Gene is teaching or preaching about a thing, take what it is that he's sharing in, but then go do your own research so that you're not being what Sarah's described, easily led sheeple. And that's what, unfortunately, our worship institutions are filled with. They're filled with people who own books, probably several translations of those books, and they don't know the content of those books well enough to push back and say, I'm sorry, you're wrong there. And the funny thing about it is, you all are being kind, and you're talking about individual congregants. Some of the churches that have been mentioned in these articles have boards. And so the board should be listening to this governance board, and that's almost like our leadership team. If Matt was going to say, the Lord told me that one of the new edicts is going to be that Wednesday is pumpkin day, and pumpkins are going to rain from the sky, and we're going to have our fill of pumpkins. The Lord told me that. And then on Tuesday, the ground gets wet, but on Wednesday there are no pumpkins. If Gene or Steve or Sarah don't say, excuse me, where are the pumpkins? The leadership group needs to say, Pumpkinhead told us that there are going to be pumpkins happening on Wednesday, and there ain't no pumpkins. What do we do about him telling us not only about more pumpkins, but anything? And so that's in part what this lesson and all of our lessons have been about, is preparing us to put on the whole armor, because weird times are coming, folks. Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I was just going to say, now you start to put us into the position where we start to feel, and actually are, meddling. So, and getting all up in each other's business. And people don't necessarily want to do that. We kind of like to stay in our little bubbles and go, that's somebody else's problem. That's not mine. I'm just going to stay away from this. But because it starts to put us in a different position that people aren't comfortable with.
Do you know how surprising it is, based on Sarah's point right now, that surprisingly, church members don't like to meddle in each other's business. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people who are professed believers say this phrase to me. And I'm hearing this phrase a lot more often these days, given the times that we live in. Well, I always avoid talking about religion and politics. And my response when I hear somebody say that is this one. Well, I always talk with people about religion and politics because at this point in my life, I don't have the time to invest small talk. And so the only way to really figure out kind of who people are is by figuring out what they don't want to talk about, which is religion and politics.
And then you start stepping on toes. It's very true because, you look at people and, even now, people just don't want to go down that road because of the whole culture that people are in now. And they don't want to, quote unquote, lose their friends.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Lose their jobs, so to speak.
Right.
Lose whatever, lose their livelihood in some way, shape, or form. And now, if you start to meddle and you get into, and you offend the wrong person or the right person, whichever way you want to look at it,
right,
there's a whole lot of blowback that can now happen. And so it tends to make people a little more tentative to get into that kind of a discussion. Just my thoughts for today.
may I share something? A lot of these people, this is kind of going back to the previous discussion about Steve's postings and that which I read with regard to this nomination that Biden has come up with. And it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong here, you guys check me on this, the people who are saying foul, crying foul when Focus on the Family says that that's not the right thing, or says something, and then someone else says that's the wrong thing, then these people that are crying foul, the liberals, are, well, I'm going to use the term Darwinists, okay? I want you to listen to something out of Darwin's book. I want you to listen carefully, and I want to see if you can hear something they might take issue with if they didn't know this was coming from Darwin. Okay? Finally, we have seen that natural selection, which results from the struggle for existence, and which almost inevitably induces extinction and divergence of character in the many descendants from one dominant parent species, explains that great and universal feature in the affinities of all organic beings, namely their subordination in group under group. We use the element of descent in classing the individuals of both sexes and of all ages, although having few characters in common under one species. We use descent in classing acknowledged varieties, however different they may be from their parent. And I believe this element of descent is the hidden bond of connection which naturalists have sought under the term of the natural system. Did you hear it? Did you hear it? We use the element of descent in classifying the individuals of both sexes. Okay, so their Darwin guy says, is there any other way you can understand the word both than to be just two? Their guy says both. So they are going astray from their own principles when they go beyond both. And that's part of where I'm thinking I need to write something, because their guy is touting something that they are resisting when we say it, because we're saying it. We're the ones saying it.
So there's nothing at all wrong with your perspective, Brother Gene. The challenge area of what you're talking about is this. The folks to whom you're referring have left Darwin as their guy quite some time ago. The culture that exists right now is one of identity and not one of science and not one of fact or truth. And if it is truth, it's my truth may be different from your truth. And that's why the Steve article, in terms of watching the Christian publication kind of get temporarily censored, is key, because all they're doing is reporting on something similar to what that Darwin section is. But you can't say that in today's culture anymore, because science no longer has the promise to be able to usurp God's position. Identity now and how you identify is more of a stronger tool to move God off of his throne by the culture in which we live right now. So most of us here grew up in a culture where Darwin was used, an origin of species was used to say, well, science suggests that God and the Bible are not right. Well, we've moved away from Darwin and what those science truths say, because the whole fact that there are more genders than just two, which is a scientific fact, which is a physiological fact, and the fact that that's being pushed back on suggests we're way out of that wading pool. We are in some place that's almost unpredictable in terms of how we push back. Because if how you identify is more important, well, then it's very easy for me to be a small Asian girl of 8 years old. And you can't push back on that with any factual. Chris, stop laughing about that. You can't push back with anything that you have from a factual standpoint, because if that's how I feel, that is preeminent over what science or what the Bible says.
But hang on. Isn't this the foundation of their ability to do that? Isn't their ability to do that founded in this document and others that they use to support this, that says that God is an error, God isn't existing, natural selection is their God now, and therefore we don't have to worship him. And because we have that kind of backing, if you will, we can take identification. We can actually say what we want to say. We can be what we want to be, you know. And I'm sure the Army didn't mean 8-year-old Asian girl when they said be all you can be, but you know. So isn't this still foundational to the premise that their identification is now their law?
No, I think it's a whole new playbook. It's a whole new playbook, and the rules are still being written. And that's the interesting part about the studies we're doing, about us preparing ourselves, because it's almost like, if you remember, and this is, I'm going to make a really silly analogy. There used to be a TV show when we were kids. They rebought it back, but I can't handle it now because it's hosted by a guy named Snoop Dogg. It used to be called The Joker's Wild. And it was a game show where it was kind of like Jeopardy. You had to pick the category that you were going to answer in. And so you pick a category, and then you were posed the question, and then you answer. But if you were posed categories that you didn't like, but you got a joker, you could take the joker and go off the board and pick your own category. So my feeling about, and I could be certainly wrong about this, is we have the empirical nature of the Bible and what God says. And we have an offshoot, which is kind of philosophy and science, which mankind has now, for about 100, 150 years, elevated above the Bible. And now we have a whole new culture that says, I don't like either one of those. I want to take my joker and go off the board, and I want to pick body surfing on the moon for 200. That's where we are.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's hard for us to get out of the way that we think, but we tend to think in the ideas of objective truth, and that's no longer the case. No one thinks that way anymore. So you could say, even if you think about it, Darwinism itself was based upon an idea that there is some knowable objective truth that you can discern through a scientific process.
Correct.
But that has now changed based upon how you feel. If you even look at what's going on in society today, think about even the wretched guy. He uses the term untethered, and right. Meaning the point, it's untethered from this idea of there being an objective truth to anything. So science really is only used as the be all know all when it's convenient. Right. So think about this. The science will tell you that in your biology, in your chromosomes, you're either male or female. That's it. Science will tell you that a child is a child at the moment of conception because you have your own unique DNA. That's what science will tell you. Right. But feelings will tell you that child's inconvenient, so it's just a fetus and you can kill it. Feelings will tell you can identify whatever you want to identify as, regardless of the science. Unless it comes to something like, I don't know, coronavirus, where they say, well, the science says you need to wear 47 masks. So it's all really, it's only useful in terms of if it fits their agenda or not. If it does, then you can reference science as the authority. If not, then how you feel about a thing is the authority.
And if those feelings change, it's fine. Because look at, I saw something come across Twitter yesterday from Halsey, how do you pronounce that chick's name? She's right. She is pro-abortion, right? Right. But now she's pregnant, and her quote was something like, I love this little human inside of me, or something like that. I can't think how she worded it, but I'm thinking to myself, it kind of goes along with what Steve's saying, that feelings, and it's okay that your feelings change, and it's okay.
Right.
Your truth is my truth is my truth, and your truth is your truth, and never the twain shall meet.
Correct. And so, Gene, look, I appreciate you doing the science homework that you're doing, because that's going to give us all the information to argue objectively to folks who still hold on to the fact that there's an empirical nature in the world. But that's not the world we live in right now. The world we live in is make up your own stuff, and whatever you make up, that's true because that's true for you. And it's hard as all get out to push back on it. And that's why, what Sarah said is really true, is John Legend and his wife experienced an abortion. Well, they're okay, not an abortion, a miscarriage. So they're pro-choice, except when they had the miscarriage, then they're lamenting the loss of a baby. That it doesn't make sense. A lot of stars, and you've heard us talk about this before, somebody will die and they'll say, R.I.P., rest in power, or whatever, and then sometimes they'll close it out with, our thoughts and prayers go with you. Who are you praying to? If there is no God, what's the point of you praying? So the fact that there are contradictions in the very sentences from one sentence to another that they make, that clash doesn't prove you to be an imbecile in today's society and culture.
So wait a minute. Let me make certain I understand you. What you're saying is logic has no bearing, and what we have to do in order to get by in this society is learn how to stand in the bottom of the hourglass in the sand. Right?
Essentially. And keep your head above the sand by stepping on the grains that keep you able to avoid suffocation. Yes.
Okay, so that this is an opportunity, it seemed like to me, to make the good news again, the good news, saying you don't have to live like that. You can actually have something in the way of a foundation. You can actually have something that's solid. You can actually have something that you can rely upon, rather than having to change with every whim of the society. You don't have to be driven by, and Paul talks about this, every wind and wave of doctrine. Is there any other time in history when we had more winds and waves of doctrine batting us about than we have right now?
You know what? Possibly, but not from a worldwide, affecting everyone at the same time, current tone the way it is right now. You'd certainly have patches of people experiencing crazy. Right now, because of the streaming and the ability to digitally reach the world in seconds, crazy is affecting the entirety of the world in a short period of time. And in many ways, as the Westerners go, as the United States operates, so goeth much of the world. And folks, that's why we're spending time with some old chestnuts. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. So when Gene says, yes, this is such a time for the good news to be brought out as an answer for the shifting tides that shift weekly and daily, that's what we're trying to do. And we're trying to help you in a way that I don't even almost want to predict this, to help make you culture proof, to help make you unworkable. Because, folks, look, I know it seems crazy, but what Steve posts in the Sunday school chat lines, in part what we're taking a look at right now, folks, we're looking at the persecution of Jesus believers coming to your doorstep. And you've got to figure out how you're going to respond when you can't say, Jesus is my Lord.
But hang on a second. why can't I say, I feel Jesus is my Lord?
Oh, because Steve probably didn't remind you of this, but here's the thing. Your truth is okay to be your truth, except when your truth is inconvenient for all of us. And the inconvenient truth for all of us is that Jesus hogwash.
See, this is the thing that frustrates the fire out of me, is because it's like, you know, they're just swimming around in for their own convenience, and there's nothing solid for them to grab a hold of. And when I grab a hold of something that's solid, I'm weird because I got something solid to hang on to. And because I don't get it. I'm sorry. Now you've about talked me out of doing my writing, because who's going to read something that actually makes sense?
So, Brother Gene, when you asked the question, was the world ever like this? Here's my real response to you. I think the world was a whole like this before the flood. And I think maybe even if it was different, it was even differently wicked. And here's why. Noah said, the Lord told me there's going to be a flood. And people said, okay, that's great. What's a flood? And so Noah explained that to them. And then he said, well, it's going to happen because it's going to rain. And then they said, that's good. What's rain? And then Noah said, well, look, I'm going to tell you what it is. And in order to escape this, the Lord's asked me to build an ark. And they went, that's good. What's an ark? So because mankind had longer lives back then, they watched Noah build this thing and no rain and no flood happening. And they watched him do it on dry land, and they went, idiot. That guy's an idiot. Let's keep doing all the stuff that we're doing right now, because obviously there's no consequences and there's no truth to what that guy just said. So let's just keep doing what it is that we're doing. And then the rains came. And so the world then got to watch on display for 100 years this guy and his family ardently working to build a boat because the Lord had told them to. And they regularly, for 100 years, got to point their fingers and go camp out and go, if you guys want to go see the show, I know where the show is. Let's go set up and have a picnic where these idiots are building a boat out in the middle of nowhere. And so, folks, it's a Bible story, but that's kind of what we're living in right now.
And they were no longer idiots when all the water started coming. They're probably trying to, I can just picture them running to the ark and knocking on the door going, hello, hello, can you let us in? You know, so yeah.
What I picture is I picture Judges, where it's kind of you'll have a period in history where things are going well because people are following after God, and then as they move away from God and they become a godless sort of society, you see the morality change, and you see a situation where what used to be up is no longer up, it's down, and what used to be down is no longer down, it's up, and they pay the consequences for that. And I kind of think what we're seeing now is a post-Christian sort of society where that's what there is no objective standard. What's up is down, what's down is up. It's so I think of Judges when I look around and see culture right now.
So when Gene, you're asking the question, has the world ever experienced a time of similar circumstances? I think the answer is yes. And it's just, but we're looking at small, logistically portions of the world when we see pictures of where Noah was, or Jews in Israel, or the Jews in Babylon, etc. But right now, stupid is affecting the whole world, and there's almost no place to be able to go because people are being affected by the streaming stupid. And you got to pick. You got to pick how you're going to stand. And so, we regularly over the years we've made a reference to Ephesians 6, and you have to understand what putting on the whole armor means. But folks, this is why Paul talked about that, because all this is, even though people are seeming to be the tools, this is all a part of the spiritual warfare that's been predicted since Genesis. And folks, that's why we're talking about having you read your Bible, having you understand Jesus's interactions with people, to understand the hidden truths that weren't so hidden to the Jews listening to Jesus, so that the Bible becomes a living document for you, that you get excited by it and you recognize that Jesus was not surprised by Judas doing what he did. Jesus was not surprised by Peter doing what he did. And if he wasn't surprised by those guys, then he's not surprised by the times that we're in. But folks, if we're going to be members of his family, members of his army, and a part of the harvest, then we got to know how to push back on this, but we also need to know how to be able to stand. And that's why we're talking about is knowing too much not a good thing? Are we good representatives of our culture? And I would strongly suggest to you that today's modern churchgoers are not good representatives of Jesus's culture. So I want to give you a couple of things to take a look at that are about cultural context and places where you can get on board to whether people are single or double masked, whether they're wearing a helmet, if they're at least engaged in a kind of conversation and you overhear, or it's the right climate to be able to do this, there are opportunities for you to get involved and push back a little bit. So let me give you some items that you're going to see Sarah probably pop on the screen to help you understand that there's some things you should be owning, understanding that you own them, and then look for opportunities to be able to engage about the ownership. And so let me give you 5 of those that are going to pop up here, and we'll talk a little bit about those. So when you see that neat little fish that's on the back of people's cars, or it's on the business cards, or it's on a business building, you need to own that bad boy, because that's yours. And that's representative of Jesus and Peter's first major interaction, where Jesus says to Peter, somebody fill in the blank, follow me, and I kind of see you, Gene. Somebody help out there in virtual land.
Fishers of men.
Fishers of men. And so the early way that during persecuted times that believers would identify themselves, if they didn't describe themselves as followers or believers of the way, is they would draw either in the hand of the person with whom they were meeting or on the ground that fish symbol. And that would identify them as Jesus followers, as Jesus believers. So that fish thing, you own it. And when there's an opportunity to discuss it, jump right in, especially if you want to talk about the ICTUS that's inside it. All of that stuff has some meaning, I think, Gene, doesn't it? It's all shorthand for Greek stuff. So you own the fish. And that means if you're even in a fish market and folks are double or triple masked, you can get into a fish conversation in the fish market about your ownership of the fish symbol. One of my favorites is probably the next one that Sarah's going to post up. And folks that have known me for years know I do this one on purpose. I love the abbreviation Xmas. And it's still one that regularly gets churchgoers in a fit. As I'll say to them, Merry Xmas. And the thing they'll do is they'll look at me with some scorn and they'll say, you're taking the Christ, you're taking Jesus out of Christmas. And then I will respond back and saying, no, I'm actually putting the Christ in Christmas. Because that X, I think that's got some symbolism. Doesn't it, Gene, help?
Yeah, that was one of those things that used to offend me the same way. I would get bent out of shape. I'm going, so you're Xing out Christ. And then all of a sudden, I went to this school and they taught me this language, and it was like, oh, wait a minute, the Greek letter that looks like our X is really the CH, which is the first letter of the Greek word for Christ. So you're not taking him out. He's still there. It's just written a little differently. And
Yes.
it's an opportunity to share an understanding. So that offends me hardly any at all now, because I understand it better. But yeah, there are some folks that are, unfortunately, lots of church folks are limited to English and maybe even the these and thous kind of English, so they're stuck with that, and so they can't get it out of their own way when it comes to understanding what the Bible says.
Correct. And so, folks, own it. If you see or you can engage in the Merry Xmas, especially around Christmas time, own it. And sometimes owning it helps you to create meaningful interactions with people who are churchgoers. Say it. Throw the grenade into the bivouac and see who comes out. And Merry Xmas is one of those. Own it.
One of the neat things about doing that is it allows you to have a conversation where you're able to bring in the thing we're saying society doesn't want anymore, reason. You're able to bring in intelligence. You're able to bring in logic. You're able to show that Christianity is a thinking man's faith. And they don't get that. I used to think that this whole evolution thing was for thinking people. It's not anymore. It's for just people who want to feel a certain way. I'm sorry, you've messed me up completely now, Preston. I got nothing.
I'm sorry, Gene. I'm going to be there when you write that book, and I will do a forward, or I will just sign it, or whatever. When you write it, I will be there as long as the Lord lets me be around. So I'm looking forward for it.
Okay, listen, you shouldn't have said that, because scary thing, I was thinking that because you've got a handle on this whole, what I feel is what's important, we ought to team write this thing. You know, Jenkins and LaHaye can't move over, we're going to have Redding and Thomason.
Oh, no, we have Jenkins. We've got Jenkins to be able to help write that. We just take the LaHaye out, so we're in good shape. Thank you. Folks, you don't have to like Skittles to own the rainbow. You own it. Now, that's a more precarious situation to tackle, because it's been misappropriated by a whole group who've hijacked the rainbow. But I would tell you, folks, that's a terrific way to get into discussion with those folks who've hijacked it by saying, do you know where that comes from? Do you know why that was there? Do you know who created the rainbow? Own it. It's a part of our culture. So don't let people walk around with your wallet in your handbag without you saying, excuse me, thief.
What's
Go
this?
get your wallet.
So sad about that is that there are Christian schools and things like that who won't allow their children to wear a T-shirt with a rainbow on it or have a party with a rainbow cake because of now the reference to the LGBTQ community.
Right.
How sad is that?
So it has to do with our whole topic of conversation today. It's the parents who don't want to teach their kids to wade into the fray by owning why they're wearing the shirt. That means if you wear that shirt, you got to be able to explain and possibly defend why you're wearing it. But you're walking around with people taking your stuff. You need to chase the people down and say, that's my stuff. I like them less now, but I really liked them a whole lot when I was younger. The candy cane is yours. In fact, the candy cane, if it was correctly named, would have been the Candy J. So if you understand how that works, see, we think about it, the candy cane being an inverted thing we hang on the tree, and it is, but it's an inverted J because the guy who invented it was a believer. And his whole point of the candy cane was Jesus's blood and Jesus's purity. And give me a J for Jesus. You own the candy cane. So when you're going to go trim the tree during Christmas in somebody's house, you need to explain they're putting a whole bunch of upside down J's on their tree. You own that.
It goes even beyond that. If you get an authentic, and there's the word, you get an authentic candy cane, it actually, the striping was very intentional as well, representative of the Trinity. Also, the stripes are just exactly the way he originally designed those things. He's got Trinity in there. He's got the unity of the Godhead in there, and yes, the J is upside down. So yeah, if you get all of those together, yeah, the Candy J is a great thing. That
I would almost tell you, be a pain in the tush. Call them Candy J's, because if you do that, you're going to get people asking you, "It's a Candy J," and you know what that means? You've just opened the door for me to take one of my masks off and go, "Oh well, Candy J is." I'm going to tell you what a Candy J is. And probably the last one that's holiday oriented. And I had told Sarah this before because we started this in a time when, well, it would have been around Christmas time. But 6 months later, it's not Christmas anymore. But at least you'll have tools while people are picking up their tree trimmings and ornaments and stuff for next year. So you'll be prepared next year if the Lord lets us stick around. So the evergreen tree. Now, this messes with people. Sometimes even Christians, because of the book of Jeremiah and talking about kind of the Jeremiah tree and the worship of the tree. That's not what the evergreen tree at all is about. It really is supposed to symbolize that Jesus, like the evergreen tree, is one that's not deciduous. Nice big word there. Somebody help me understand what that means.
deciduous means falling down. It's a tree that doesn't drop its.
You got it. So when Gene is bagging up all the leaves in his old yard, that's because he's got a lot of deciduous trees back there. In the back of my yard, there's a whole lot of evergreens that are perpetually green. And that's a testament to Jesus being forever alive. And then when you chop the tree down and bring it into your house, you're inviting Jesus and his life into your home. That's what the Christmas tree is. Own it. So let me take a pause there. I've yelled and made a whole lot of noise. Your thoughts, your commentary there.
You don't want my commentary on that.
Well,
I am and have been for years, when it comes to Christmas, a Scrooge, and I make the distinction, not a Grinch, but a Scrooge. Excuse me, because I'm still tied up into Jeremiah 10 you're talking about for that tree. That offends me personally, but that's just me. And I don't believe that he was born December 25th. I don't even know for sure he was born in December. And there's no year zero. There's a whole bunch there that really just kind of bugs me. But I celebrate his birth because his birth was in the shadow of the cross, and the cross is where my faith is, because that's the death, burial, and resurrection. He's alive now. He wasn't before. He spent 3 days dead. Nobody spends just 3 days dead. That doesn't even go with mostly dead. That's just, I mean, you are either dead or you're not. And he was 3 days dead, and then he's alive now and forevermore. And that's where I'm.
So kids, Gene's not wrong there. And what he's done is, again, he's gotten himself kicked out of some churches because he's just elevated that Easter is really the day, Resurrection Sunday is really the day that matters the most. Baby Jesus is great and cool, but resurrected Jesus is why we're meeting today. The list that you're looking at right now, as colorful and as well presented as Sarah put it together, is folks, for you to almost do what the more liberal persons in our world just did over the past year, which is this: don't let a good holiday go to waste if you can own it. You can own elements of it, use it. So even if you hate stuff about it, you've got enough tools here to be able to say, well, because I'm with Gene, Jesus wasn't born in Christmas, December 25th. It may have, if there were shepherds and stuff out, depending on the season, it couldn't have been December, not even in Jerusalem. But I also understand that some of the things you're looking at are about intent. The creators didn't intend the evergreen tree to be worshipped, even though that's what people like to do. People like to worship. There are people who worship Christmas. There are people who worship Halloween. There are people who worship Easter Bunny, let alone the Tooth Fairy. So take the opportunities, even in these weird holidays or weird ornamental festivities, to own the things that we can own and use them as discussion fodder. So the last part of this that I'm going to close out with, and then we'll try to pick up on the beginnings of maybe our next lesson, is if you're meeting folks who have, I don't know if you have this experience. So interestingly, I have a number of people that I know that they're having kids, over the past couple of years, and they're not a part of a worship group, and they name their kids Bible names, and it always mystifies me because typically when I have interactions with them, one of the first things I will say is, "Do you know your kid's name is blank?" Now that actually sounds like a dumb question. And so let me give you an example. Let me give you a tough example and then an easy example. We have some friends who has a kid named Elijah, Tobias, and something else that's kind of very Bible oriented. And so once they told us their kids' names, I said to them, "Do you know your kid's name is Elijah?" Now, obviously, their answer to me is going to be, "Yeah, I know my kid's name is Elijah." But what I've tried to just do now is to open up the door to the next question, which is, why did you name your kid Elijah? And then to be able to perhaps go down the road to suggest, do you know who Elijah is? And if I'm also savvy enough, and what Elijah means. And so, believer, I'm going to suggest strongly to you, when you see a name that ends in AH, that ends in EL, those are opportunities for you to open up the door to claiming something that's a part of your culture. And both of those are direct references to Yahweh, God, or God. So when you hang out with a Michael, it's okay for you to ask, do you know what your name means? Do you know where it comes from? Because in the culture in which we live, if you're not given permission to be able to discuss, you're going to have fewer and fewer opportunities to exchange, especially with people you don't know, let alone with people who feel like they should not have exchanges with you because of the bubonic plague that you're representing to them by being in interaction. So let me pause there and give you any opportunities to feedback or respond.
Sometimes people don't necessarily pick names because they mean something to them, right? I mean, my parents did, and we did with the boys. But sometimes, and I know people who have done this, trying to think of names and they go online to find the most popular names given to boys and girls. And that's kind of the way they go. It doesn't necessarily, they don't necessarily pick it for a specific reason other than, hey, this is the name of the year, right? Or I didn't want to go this way because it was the name of the year, and now we want to be something different. But a lot of times people don't realize the names that they've picked actually mean something. They just sometimes pick it because they like the way it sounds, or they like the way the first and the middle names sound together.
Yep.
So, but it is always an interesting thing, because when I was a teenager way back when, you could actually get cards, right, that had your name on them and what they meant. You don't see that now out there that much. I mean, I put together a whole book of stuff because that's what I did when I was a teenager. But it was very interesting to see that. But you look now and you don't necessarily find that anyplace. It used to be all over the place back in the 80s.
Yep.
But now not so much, because people don't necessarily put as much stock in what a name means like they used to.
All the more reason to do exactly what Preston's saying. People have arbitrarily chosen a name because it sounds good. It was on a list. It came up on their screen, but they don't really know what it means. And so again, the name ends with JAH, especially. That's Yah. That's Yahweh. That's God in the name, or EL is God in the name, Elohim. So you can actually, and of course both those are Hebrew. You can make use of that and say, does he act like that? Is she like that? Whatever, and you can ask the question, and it does initiate a conversation, because now you're talking about, at least it used to be, their pride and joy. You're talking about the thing they love more than life.
Correct.
And so you can actually get their attention with that, saying, you have a name that you've given to this child. You should probably understand that, and more so, you should understand what that means to you and to the one that represents.
Correct. And I realize in some ways that I'm encouraging you to violate your own principles of live and let live. But I think that the call that we have on our lives as professed and hopefully possessed believers is we're not supposed to live and let live. We're supposed to intrude on people's lives to say, there's better, there's different, there's answers that maybe you're not aware of. And some of where we're going to go with our next lesson is going to help to flesh that out. But folks, please be aware, there's a method to the madness of the studies that we've been in since the mandate has come about, which is people are disease. And that mandate is to help us prepare that the world is forever changed by whatever this is, and it's not done evolving yet. And we need to not feel like we have a get out of evangelism free card, because the mandate basically says people are bad. Interacting with people is bad. Meeting like this, good. Meeting at a distance in your house safely, good. This is not what the Lord called us to. Now, it doesn't mean we don't use the technology to allow the Holy Spirit to do what he can do using the tools that mankind has created. But this is not how Jesus discipled people. And so we can't be limited to think that this is the best way and the only way.
I have to interject here. Something Kathy showed me, I think it was last night, with this impending snowstorm. It was fake. I'm going to say right up front, it was fake. Okay? It was Northam making a declaration with regard to the storm, and there's a limit to 3 snowmen in your yard they must have masks, and they must have 3 feet of distance, or 6 feet distance between them. That's how crazy this has gotten.
Folks, we've been kind of flip about referring to the mandates, et cetera. But look, I'm going to tell you, just like our earlier discussion with evolution and identity, there's a world, and there are going to be a people that come out of this believing that this is what is respectful. This is how you operate in a society of people. And I can't tell you the neighborhood posts that I read that talk about the importance of getting this vaccine, et cetera, and returning to normal. And folks don't realize the prognosticators and even the scientists that are involved in this vaccine process are telling you, you need to get the vaccine, but you're still going to be wearing the masks and the facial covering and the gloves and stuff. So this is not going to go away, folks, where we are infectious and negatively contagious by being in each other's company. So we've got to figure out how to wear the spiritual armor in a time there's no way I could have predicted this, let alone a year ago, certainly not 5 or 10 years ago, but we're here.
What if, just a thought, what if this doesn't really end? What if we have children who grow to an adulthood and have not known a time where there weren't masks everywhere and social distancing and lack of gathering and all these regulations? What if we get to that place and this is a 20-year event?
Okay, so
just a thought.
I've got the answer to that. Here's what's going to happen. People are going to lose the ability to talk. Apes are going to be able to talk. And then what's going to happen is Planet of the Apes. Best I can tell you. Because I don't think the apes are discontinuing socialization. And they're going to develop the ability to verbalize. And then eventually they're going to become the dominant culture. And humans are going to be kept in pens and camps. The best I got for you.
Wow. Oh, I like that. That's a cute trick, Sherry. How'd you do that? I like that.
Look down at the bottom. Look at the bottom of your screen where it says mute and unmute, and then go all the way over to the right, and you'll see the little smiley face icon. Click on that, and it gives you all these emojis.
Okay. Oh, I love it. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Let the fun begin.
So we're closing the door in terms of the official meeting for our Remez and our knowing as much as you need to know study that we've just done. But folks, please, just because we're leaving the study doesn't mean don't incorporate the skill or the study elements into your life practices, because when you read the Bible for Remez, it becomes richer because you see the depth of what Jesus really meant and why he could be effective in the way that he was in only 3.5 years of ministry. You see it differently. And so I'm going to encourage you to do that. And I'm also going to always tell you folks, look, whether Steve posts something, whether I post something, whether Matt posts something, whether Gene posts something, please trust us, but go do your work and see if indeed it's what it is that honors the Lord. So
just recently I was reading the end of Matthew again, and you hear these people saying, Jesus never said he was the Son of God. Jesus never said he was the Son of God. But yet I read in Matthew where the ones who are sending him to be crucified, because they couldn't do it, the Romans had to do it, they're saying he said he was the Son of God. So if they're saying that he said that, he must have said that, otherwise none of this would be happening. And if he said that, you have to find out where, and it is a lot of times in the remez. It is a lot of times in the idioms of the day. It is a lot of times in the understanding that their culture had that we completely miss. In English, we say I am, and that doesn't mean anything. But in their culture, they say I am, and they're saying something completely different.
And thank you. You know, that's a perfect bow, Gene, for know your culture. Christians, you need to own and know what our culture is about, and you need to step in and own it in the right way where you're not tripped up by Bible passages, tripped up by Bible idioms, by Bible cliches, so that, you know, we made reference to it last week. When the Jehovah's Witnesses come to your door, when the Mormons come to your door, when you are met by the Scientologists who are going to potentially, or the Christian scientists who are going to use your Bible to tell you things that are heresy in terms of how to honor God and who Jesus is, you need to know how to push back. And that's what some of our last series of study has been about. So having said that, let's go ahead and kick that door closed behind us, even though it stays figuratively open. And in your Bibles, go ahead and turn over to 2 Peter 1. And our new study is going to be titled Pardoned and Rewarded for Good Behavior. Pardoned and Rewarded for Good Behavior. And our subtitle is going to be, does your behavior truly have eternal purpose and value? And as a little bit of a closet Calvinist, this is out there kind of for Gene, at the very, very bottom, making your calling and election sure. And this is going to mess with some of us because this is going to talk about actions. This is going to kind of wrap itself around maybe even the book of Gene. The book of Gene is only in my library. You probably don't have it in your Bibles yet. The book of James is what I really meant, not the book of Gene. But the book of Gene is going to be great reading. So be prepared for that. So, and we'll talk about that as we get there, because we're going to talk a lot about actions. We're going to talk a lot about philosophy and attitude. And that in some ways is going to seem to clash with the idea that salvation is a gift, and it's a gift freely given. And then how do those two kind of coincide? That's kind of what we're going to be talking about. So let's go ahead and read the passage. And our passage is going to be 2 Peter 1, 3 through 11, but I'm going to start at 1 and 2 anyway. So Simon Peter, a servant and apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who, through the righteousness of our God and our Savior, Jesus Christ, have received a faith as precious as ours, grace and peace be yours in abundance through the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Through these, he has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness, knowledge, and to knowledge, self-control, and to self-control, perseverance, and to perseverance, godliness, and to godliness, brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness, love. For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But if anyone does not have them, he is nearsighted and blind, and has forgotten that he has been cleansed from his past sins. Therefore, my brothers, be all the more eager to make your calling and election sure, for if you do all these things, or if you do these things, you will never fall, and you will receive a rich welcome into the eternal kingdom of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. This is a powerful, I'm borrowing one of Matt's adjectives. We're going to talk a little bit about this when we get to the nuts and bolts of the verse and their significance and even application itself. But you got to understand that, and I just want to point this out as we start. This is written by a fisherman. This is written by a fisherman through a amanuensis, or through a Guy Friday, basically the rich young kid, probably John Mark, who's writing this for him in Greek. And this is written by a guy that we would formally refer to as a whack job. And his opening statement, now we didn't even talk about First Peter, but this is Second Peter, this is the second letter. If you had any indication that, or any question, if Peter recovered from his denial of Jesus, if he recovered from being an impetuous, speak first, act first, don't think at all kind of person, this opening passage tells you you're looking at a guy who's got a spiritual maturity that he's gigantic. And so sometimes even among Bible readers, there's almost a competition between who's the bigger Christian New Testament patriarch. Is it Paul? Well, certainly Paul's a monster. And we only have 2 letters by Peter, but let me tell you, they're jam-packed. Gene is an expert in First Peter, so if you need to ask him what is in First Peter, go through it, because Gene has done it verse by verse, and not even verse by verse, sometimes word by word, and even letter by letter.
Okay, you've made the same mistake that Bob Kay does. I didn't do that lengthy study in First Peter. I did that 18 months in the chapter we're looking at right now.
There you go. So Second Peter.
Second Peter.
Okay. So hopefully, if we do this well, you'll be a testimony to the fact that we're kind of getting it right.
I hope so. I mean, but you're right. Here we've got Peter, who has breakfast on the beach, cooked by the Lord himself, and he has this restoration, and he is able to, in the first verse, identify his Jewish name, identify his Greek name, identify himself as hearing as well as Rocky, and identify himself as a bond servant. He's okay with that now. He thought he'd lost all of that, but more especially as an apostolos, as a sent representative of Jesus Christ. He understands himself as having been sent now. So he's gotten his act back together. And again, here's a fisherman who, just because he had this culture, this Jewish culture that he was raised in, he understands some stuff that a fisherman today might not. So right. He's together.
This is going to be, I think, and maybe it may not be as lengthy as some of those that we've done before, but it actually might be, because we've got Brother Gene's expertise, and that might say that although I'm facilitating, we may be doing some tag team teaching here, maybe like going up against the Sumo brothers, who are the villains in the wrestling tag team match, and you guys are the good guys. And the villains are going to win in this one, so I'm going to tell you ahead of time. But I hope that we have fun going through this, especially because Sarah's already warned me that we're not going to go into the in-depth scripture stuff first. We're actually going to start with the posting that you had in your Sunday school trail. And hopefully what will happen as we do that is Gene will turn to me and he will say, how do these questions have anything to do with the passage in 2 Peter 1, 3 through 11, and if we do a good job, that will become discoverable very quickly. So let's jump right in, and let's take a look at that first question. And the first question reads, "What is your purpose in life?" So hopefully you've gotten the Sunday school assignment. Hopefully you've done some work. What do you have written there?
All right, so I already told you my answer, right? Because, you know, you could put the spin on this and give you the church answer or the churchified answer or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
But really, you know, when I was thinking about this, because I did have to scratch my head, and I'm still scratching my head, and I'm laughing at some of the answers that I put down. But really, you know, if you ask your everyday person, right, what their purpose in life is, they're probably going to say something to the effect of to do and be the best I can in everything I do.
Yep.
Right? You know, and then you get the churchy answer, right, which my purpose in life is to do everything to glorify God. But so, and then you can start the whole shebang from there. Like I said, I scratched my head on this one, and I'm laughing at my answers, but that's okay.
Floor is open, folks. Hopefully you've got the assignments. What you got written there?
Okay, evidently my lip reading is improving because I could read clearly what Chris said, which was, what does that mean? Ecclesiastes 12:13. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. That's our purpose. Fear God, and that's not terror, fear, but respect, fear, reverence, and keep his commandments. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And when you say that, that opens up a whole bunch more. Because if I'm going to keep his commandments, he says to me to tell as I go. If I'm going to keep his commandments, he says that I'm supposed to obey at least the first, the 10 original ones. If I'm going to keep his commandments, he says that I'm supposed to put on the whole armor of God. There's a whole bunch of commandments to do. So fear him, keep his commandments, everything else kind of falls into place. And I used to sum that up. Everyone know what I mean when I say a life's verse, a kind of a key verse you live your life by? I chose one that is short because I ain't got much. And so I wanted to make it easy to remember, but it says an awful lot. It's from John the Baptist. He must increase, I must decrease. If I get that little bit right, everything else falls into place.
That's almost too huge to follow as an answer. Except it's very followable. And here's why. So we're just opening up this particular can of worms. But I want you to be aware of this, and we'll talk a little bit more, I think, because we're waiting for Matt to join us. Is Matt on with us?
He's going to be probably just a few minutes after 11, but we've got about 20 minutes of videos, so okay. Yeah, so we're good.
So the answer that Gene just gave is truly the ideal. But the study and the discussion that we're going to go through is going to flesh out the key to this. And that ultimate key is, if you say that to live in the fear of God, to honor and glorify God is what it is, that is the purpose of my life, then the question ultimately is going to be posed to you, which is, can you help with that? How are you doing that? Mm-hmm. Okay? So, if you've not addressed these questions this week, because I'm looking at the clock, it's 10:59, please do so that in subsequent weeks, you've got reference to the answers of the homework there so that you can read them off. Because I believe that if you challenge yourself with these questions in this study, the way certainly that Sarah and I have, you're going to discover that you like to answer the way that Gene just did. But if you read the fullness of all the questions, you're going to be asked to prove if your answer is truly what Gene just said. So please be aware too that when these lessons are put together, I'm doing the work when the lessons are put together. So these are presented to you guys so that you do the work. So that when we get into the situation to have discussions like this, you've got answers that are there that you can even just read off, because those answers are going to create discussion points that are going to help strengthen us as we realize that some of us are BSing our way through church goership. And that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as we discover it and then we can make the change. Because as long as the sun shines on us, the Lord allows us to be able to change direction. And some of this stuff, the way that Sarah also presented to me, some of this stuff is church people don't talk about this. We don't have, I mean, a lot of our study is going to be really based around this simple phrase: how's your conduct? And that's an exchange that church people avoid. In fact, when we ask each other as church people, how you doing, we give flowery weirdo answers because unless we give a whole laundry list of the diseases and the pills we take and the doctors we visited, usually we're amazingly okay. And what's reality is probably someplace in between. And that's hopefully what this lesson is going to flesh out and ferret out for us, so that we're really getting ready for the culture craze of the world crashing in on us without us being aware. So I'm done with my stuff there. Any comments, any feedbacks as we end today?
I have two. Number one, someone shared on the music line in Slack a song that goes right to that point where, truth be told, if we really say what's going on in our lives, we're messed up, we're broken. And we need to sometimes own that and say, yeah, that's where I'm living, and kind of be honest with each other. And the second thing is purpose, our purpose in life. I may speak outside of your expertise here just a little bit, Preston, but in a toolbox, there are tools that have a specific purpose. And for example, there's a thing called a wrench, and its purpose is for turning nuts and bolts. That's its purpose. But every once in a while, when you're working on something, you pull out the wrench, and regardless of what its purpose is, you try to use it as though it were something else, like a hammer or a pry bar or something like that. And so you're beating with it or prying with it, and that's not what it's designed to do. Sometimes we will, in our lives, abandon the purpose for which we're supposed to be here and try to do something else. And it's inefficient, it's ineffectual, and we need to get back to the purpose for which we were put on this planet. Just my own thoughts.
Okay. Yay. So I'm excited about the study, folks. Please do your work. Be prepared to talk. I think if we're talking about your answers, you're going to see that we're going to get some good legs out of this this challenging next lesson. And at the very least, please read 2 Peter 1, 1 through 11.